All right, how are we doing on sound here? Up, turn it up. It's good? All righty. You know I can't hear you. Good morning. It is so great to be with you guys here today. It really is. I just really look forward to being able to talk for 20 minutes straight and somebody listening to me. I just, I can't do that at home. I just can't sustain it. But anyway, no, it is a pleasure and an honor to be here with you once a month speaking. So, the first book in the Bible's Old Testament, the book of Genesis, tells the stories of several ancient Israelites, one of which is Jacob. And I am especially intrigued by the part of Jacob's story where he wrestles with an angel. Now, Jacob lived approximately 1800 BCE. That's almost 4,000 years ago. He was the traditional ancestor of the people of Israel, the grandson of Abraham and Sarah, and the son of Isaac and Rebekah. By our standards, he lived a very long life, 147 years. And yet his grandfather Abraham lived 175, and his father Isaac lived 180. Now, Jacob's story is very entwined in the book of Genesis with his father and his grandfather, and it's very intricate. So I have pulled out some of what I think is the important information on Jacob to get to where he wrestles with the angel. Jacob was a twin. His brother Esau was born first, but it is said that Jacob followed Esau out of the womb by hanging on to his foot. And this was just the beginning of Jacob striving to always be better than his older brother. Even though they were twins, they were very different. Esau was said to be red and hairy. And I had to stop and I go, what do they mean? What do they mean by that? He's red. Is it red? No, what it means is his hair was red and he was very hairy. Okay, this is important. This is important for the story, believe me. Jacob, on the other hand, was a quiet man who tended the animals. Their father loved Esau best, maybe because he was a good hunter, whereas Rebekah, their mother, loved Jacob best. Already, we see a problem here. When their mother was pregnant, she was told by God that she would give birth to twins, that each would found a great nation, and that the elder would serve the younger. The birthright traditionally given to the eldest son would have included a double share of the father's property, the leadership of the family, and the father's judicial authority. And normally the elder brother would have ruled the younger brother, serving him. Now, Jacob obtained his brother's birthright in two different ways. First of all, when they were still young men, of course, that's, I think how young is young. They lived to be 147 years old. I have no idea. But anyway, when they were younger, Esau came in from hunting and he was very hungry, and he asked his brother Jacob to give him some food. And Jacob said, okay, I'll give you some food, but you have to sell me your birthright for the food, which Esau did. Okay. Right? It's got to be a brother thing, okay? It's got to be a brother thing. However, it gets better. Later, when their father was quite old and losing his vision, he called Esau and asked him to go hunting, to make him a meat stew, bring it to him, and then Isaac would bless Esau with the traditional blessing of the elder son. Now, their mother, Rebekah, of course, who loved Jacob best, heard the conversation and conspired with Jacob to pretend to be his brother. They made a meat stew, and then Rebekah placed the skin of a goat on Jacob's hands so that when his father felt the hand, he would feel hairy. Yeah, really. These stories, this is only just little pieces. So she dressed him in Esau's clothing. So when Jacob came to his father, he lied and claimed to be Esau, and his father blessed him and passed on the birthright. Now you have to remember that once this blessing was bestowed, it could not be changed. When Esau returned and found that Jacob had well and truly stolen his birthright that should have been his, he was furious and threatened to kill his brother. So Jacob fled his brother's wrath and took refuge with his uncle Laban, who had two daughters, Leah and Rachel. The plot thickens. Jacob worked for his uncle Laban and after a time fell in love with his cousin Rachel, asking his uncle for permission to marry. His uncle told him, well, if you work for 7 more years, then you can marry Rachel, which Jacob did. He worked for 7 more years and he was allowed to marry Rachel. Well, at the marriage ceremony, the bride was veiled. And Jacob did not find out that he had actually married Leah until after the ceremony, at which point there was nothing he could do. Understandably angry, he goes back to his uncle, and his uncle again says, well, you work 7 more years, and then you can marry Rachel. You know, it's a really good thing he lived 147 years. So Jacob did work those 7 years more and was finally able to marry Rachel. In total, he worked for his uncle Laban about 20 years, greatly increasing his uncle's wealth, but also increasing his own. And having completed his commitment to his uncle, together with his wives, children, concubines, servants, and animals, headed back to Palestine. Now, I'm sure that Jacob must have been feeling the loss of his homeland and family. And yet, returning to Palestine meant that he would have to face his brother Esau's wrath. He decided that he would send an apology to Esau, but figured that his brother would probably kill him anyway. He sent messengers ahead with gifts and received word that his brother, together with 400 soldiers, was coming to meet him. He feared the worst. So he sent his wives, children, and possessions across the river to safety. Now he was alone in the desert, waiting to face his brother's wrath, figuring that he was going to die soon, and he prayed for God's help. In that barren desert, alone, he was visited. He was visited by a divine being. We don't know if this visitation was supposed to be in real time or whether it was a dream. And some translations say he was visited by God. Some translations call the being an angel. Some translations just a man. I'm going to go with angel just because I like it. So whoever the visitor was obviously of divine origin. And Jacob and this angel wrestled throughout the night. And that's the word that they use, wrestled. And throughout the night, Jacob tightly hangs on to the angel. He does not give up. He hangs on. And even when daybreak comes and the angel cripples him by wounding his hip, Jacob still hangs on. And in hanging on, he asks the angel for a blessing from God. And he was given a blessing. He was given a new name. In the Bible, when God bestows a new name on someone, it symbolizes a new identity, a new beginning. and a new calling. And the name that he was given was Israel. Israel, which literally means he struggles with God. And now you know where the word Israel comes from and what it means. He struggles with God. God's blessing on Jacob was evident, for when his brother Esau arrived, he greeted Jacob with gladness and forgiveness. Now, Jacob was free to return to Palestine, and he ended up settling in Canaan, which today encompasses the land of Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, and the southern portions of Syria and Lebanon. Together with his wives and concubines, he had 12 sons, who were the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's story is one of a never-ending struggle. His family was characterized by deep-seated hostility. Jacob was a con artist who had been conned, a liar who had been lied to, a manipulator who had been manipulated. His twin brother had vowed to kill him. His uncle had cheated him for years. And his two wives had a very adversarial relationship with each other. No surprise there. But Jacob received God's blessing. God promised Jacob that his sons would found a great nation whom the whole world would be blessed by. When we read these ancient and sacred texts, we can view them many ways. We can consider them as fiction, coming from someone's fertile imagination. We can read them as history, hundreds of years of oral stories until someone eventually wrote them down. We can view them as allegory, a story with a hidden moral meaning. We can view them as metaphors, something which means something else. We can view them as symbolic. We can pick them apart with real or imagined meanings and definitions. Looking at scripture in these ways is, for me, the proverbial rabbit hole that Alice fell into. We get lost. We get lost in that rabbit hole and lose track of the underlying sacred message. We become so involved in the nuances that it is hard to gain fruitful personal understanding of the text. And yet that passage grabs me, this wrestling with a divine being, whether it be God or an angel. It grabs my head and my heart and my gut and does not let me go. It pulls me in to look deeper and deeper. And when I look deeper, I start asking questions of myself. What does this say to me in my life right now? Have I wrestled with an angel? When? What was it about? What was the outcome? Did I hang on? Did I become stronger? Like Jacob, was I wounded? Like Jacob, was I given a new name? And like Jacob, where was the blessing? Jacob separated from everything that was known, that was familiar. In the desert, in that desert, he grappled with what was important. It was an exhausting struggle that left him crippled. And yet, why did he continue to hang on? I think that at this point in his life, he must have realized that he could not continue in this life without God. And in that recognition, he gave God authority over his life. In weakness and fear, like Jacob, I must do as we all do, face God. So what does that mean to me? What was my struggle? Not some expert, not some Bible theologian. What does it mean to me? That is the real question. And I thought long and hard on it. For these stories are meant to bring us to God, to see God more clearly. But sometimes you have to get rid of the fog that surrounds it. To me, this hanging on was a form of surrender, surrender to divine will. And that is my recognition at a soul level, because I remember a time when I wrestled with an angel. This was a time in my life when I was at a very low point. I did not understand anything that was going on around me. Plans had not worked out in the way I thought they would or should or could. People did not support me in the way that I had expected or thought I needed. It appeared that everything I had planned and longed for had suddenly disappeared, and I was left in that desert wilderness, struggling to find something that looked familiar, something to hang on to. It was at this low point when I had to give it up. I had to give up my expectations. I had to give up my assumptions, give up my fears, even give up my hopes. Like Jacob, I had to surrender to God in love, surrender to God in truth, surrender to God in faith. I had to surrender, and yet I had to hang on to the divine, to not let go. I had to surrender what I thought I wanted or needed. I had to surrender how I thought things were supposed to work out. I had to surrender to something far greater than myself, to a God who knows much more about what I need than I do. Jacob surrendered, and that was what I also had to do. I had to surrender my little will to God's greater will in love, in trust, in faith. What did that look like, you may ask? Well, it was not pretty. And yet, in retrospect, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Because this was a struggle between what I thought I wanted and what God wanted for and from me. I had to hang on and I had to give up. I had to accept the loss in order to accept the blessing. What was the blessing, you ask? It was a deep recognition that love and trust and faith connect me to the divine at all times and in all places. It was the recognition and acceptance of that covenant between me and God that cannot be broken. This is sometimes a daily struggle, sometimes minute to minute, surrendering to God's greater will. What does God want of me? What is God's will? Can I count the gain and not the loss? I come away from these passages knowing that God is always faithful and continues to bless us. This is God's grace and covenant with all of his creation. For me, Jacob's journey highlights the potential for personal change and spiritual growth through hardship and divine grace, for divine grace always has to be at the core. It highlights that the blessing is possible when we hang on and surrender. Namaste.
Thank you, Rosie.